I have been a fan of Monster Hunter since Monster Hunter Tri, and after that I played the first game, the second, Freedom Unite, 3 Ultimate, 4 Ultimate, Generations, just to name a few. Okay, I know this kind of statement is usually said in a pointless manner to recall how much of a fan of something you are, but I can guarantee you this will matter later in the review. But needless to say, I have been around this franchise for at least a decade, yet never really met a community until the coming of Iceborne, being the point of me realizing that, yeah, I'm not the only person on this planet who plays this series. Don't get me wrong, I will be able to have online sessions with people, especially in Tri, but out of all the Capcom games, for a good while this was a series that people will not be able to know what the hell are you talking about if you mention the name. With World solidifying the franchise into the map of gaming culture once and for all, as well as making people excited for the next installment, Monster Hunter Rise. Not only was this a new game for a Nintendo console that people give a crap about with the online that actually works, sorry 3 Ultimate, you were just sent to die on arrival, but also a take for Nintendo on the formula that World established as the evolution of the Monster Hunter gameplay. For those of you who may not know, Monster Hunter is self-explanatory with the title. Throughout a dedicated story, you, as an official hunter of the guild, help a village with a specific predicament, in which this game goes by the name of the Rampage, in which monsters around the area start going wild due to some natural disaster among them. This natural disaster goes, at least at the start, as the name of Magna Malo, a monster that hunts down other monsters of any kind and causes the other creatures to start running away in a dangerous way, since that same event destroyed the village a few decades ago. So as the hunter and a resident of the village, it's your specific duty to help cover a village to restore peace and take care of its predicament. But as the story unravels, you realize that the source of the rampage might not actually be that, but maybe it's been the cause of a pair elder dragons, the Wind and Thunder Serpents, Ibushi and Narwa respectively, which apparently are the real cause of the rampage, since every time they reunite to do things, they do cause Magna Malo and other monsters to start going haywire. Something that does make sense, since as the story unveils, elder dragons are living natural disasters that affect the ecosystem with their mere presence. And for the fans of the series, this kind of story might be familiar, since I feel this kind of setup is very reminiscent of how Monster Hunter Tri handled it with Deadlock Icarus and Serious Revelations. And I mentioned that one in particular since World actually had a bit of an episodic story with Nergigante and the other monsters, and 4 Ultimate did keep the story around the dedicated monsters of its stories. But yeah, as the story goes on, it's your job to prepare for the final fight, while learning a brief yet cool development within the characters, from Hinoa and Minoto's relationship and inner thoughts as they are able to resonate with the other serpents and feel their thoughts, your work causing an impact on the Jurgen Bombers, and earning the respect of the leader of the village. Hell, you even get his longsword after that fight against Magna Malo, which takes a bit to make stronger but becomes a broken mess. But I think that's more on the type of weapon, more on that later. But yeah, the story, pretty common Monster Hunter kind of story. It's not as long as World, but the story in World, if you ask me, was exactly that, long. Nothing more complex or anything beyond what we're used to. It's just that the setup was Discovery, so we got more exposition than what we're used to get. Since unlike previous games, the new world was a chance to get the lore we only get through text or not explained at all, since unlike the handler, we actually knew what we were doing in previous games. But I will say that the story gets compensated with presentation, level design, and gameplay. I know presentation wise it doesn't have as many polygons as World, but they nail it by having what I consider a more appealing aesthetic. Once again, I know World was going to a certain theme of the environments being full of life and things going on with the habitat. But I hate to say this, even with the previous games as reference, World will be a bit too claustrophobic for me. This game, while yes, some environments are taken from previous games, they managed to just implement elements added in World in order to make them as alive as it can be, making Rise that perfect combination between the classic and modern formulas. You know, just like Sonic the Hedgehog, only with more consistency and less denial and resentment from his community. There's so many things to find in every locale, and you can feel that they all have a story to tell just by exploring the visuals. You have this underground water place in the lava stage, as well as the pyramids in the flooded forest, as well as a pirate ship in the frost area, and bits of a civilization in the first area or ancient underground ruins in the desert. And the most interesting part, and the major gimmick that this game has over any other game, is the wire bug and wall running. With at least 2 consecutive shots, you can use a wire to make you reach further distances, standing in midair and even recover yourself from knockback during the fight. and if you launch yourself towards a wall or vertical surface, you can wall run it and reach the top of any distance, climbing mountains, the top of the pyramid, and the pirate ship. As long as the surface is within the bounds of the map, you most likely can climb it and find some secrets and goodies to, for at least this one mission, permanently boost up your health bar, stamina, attack, defense. This enforces the exploration quite a lot, even if you're only aiming for the hunt of a creature for the sake of making the fight better for you. You feel you need some extra health, just walk around a bit and you might find enough of these bursts to make your health bar be in a more comfortable place, and might give you just a few defense and attack points as you're going through it. When it comes to the health factor, I do prefer this over the way World handled it, since this feels closer to how it was handled back in classic games of getting max health without the need of adding charms specifically to give you max health, allowing the slots for what I consider more important things like increasing your critical rates or buffing certain skills for your weapon of choice. And just to get this out of the way, I do prefer this entire execution of level design over the new world, simply because I never felt like I had so much control over where I'm going and how I'm getting there like I have done with this game. I always felt like each area was a drag just because of how the areas were structured and how going from one area to another was still slow, even when they removed the loading each area method from earlier games. I know it sounds like a hit on World, but regardless of my comparisons here, I still played World for over 400 hours and enjoyed each second of it. I just think that when it comes to the level design and some gameplay mechanics, Rise manages to evolve by improving the elements that only happen because they started in World. Speaking of, let's talk about the gameplay mechanics. Now, it should be stated that Rise is made by the Portable team, the ones that work on the PSP games as well as Generations Ultimate, so they're known for taking the structure of the main titles and then put some extra twists here. And aside from the wire bug that allows you versatility with your travels, they also increase the speed thanks to the new bodies to have in your journeys, the Palamutes. These big dogs may have less skills than Palicles in terms of what they can do, but the major feature they have is being a support for the hunter in terms of movement. You can ride them to travel across the areas a lot faster, and when you're in the middle of a fight, they can help you move around while you're drinking a potion or sharpening your tools. In terms of weapon usage, I think it's a good time to mention that by the time of this recording, I have played over 300 hours, my hunter rank is about 170, and my main weapon of choice was the Charge Blade, with the alternatives being Switch Axe, Double Swords, Long Sword, and Hammer, and I have only practiced Gunlance, with each weapon being less used than the other in the order that I'm going. So keep in mind that there are so many other weapons that I haven't even practiced with, and I have my own set of things to consider when playing the game, and it's most likely that those preferences are gonna differ from yours by that principle. With that said, the Wirebug system mainly seems like a twist on the way skills were handled in World. Instead of having every skill and combo at your disposal, you are given these abilities as well as some new skills and even reimagined skills from Generations, but through a customization system. For example, you can have the elemental charged sword attack on the Charged Blade, or you can have the Charged Blade to do a spinning attack that does multiple hits but drains your sharpness faster. You wanna do a combusted attack on your Switch Axe like it's always been since Try, or do you wanna just make a combusted spin attack and keep a certain combo? Which, if my memory doesn't fail me, is a reimagine of a special technique in Generations, as well as the new dedicated techniques to the Wirebug like a counter charge that fully recharges your blade, or an air dash. However, other techniques, like the air attack of the Longsword, get a bit of a nerf, cause now you need to spend a Wirebug in order to make the attack to begin with. But as far as I know, Longsword 2 OP, therefore trash apparently in this game. And when you're using the Wirebugs for combat moves, the recharge from each use is longer than for traveling moves. Granted, you can find a temporary third one across the levels, but that's an execution that can be up to each player. Do you want to have everything during the fight like in World? Or would you rather customize it to have the moves that you know you will be using and mastering combo strategies? All up to you, hunters! And as tradition in this series, the name of the game is taking down monsters in your own style, carve them and get parts to build an armor that will have different stats and defense points to make your adventure a little easier and prepare you for future fights as you keep moving through the game. And again, this is where things get a bit more complicated to discuss for everyone, because now it's all a matter of how you want your playstyle to be and the stuff that you're prioritizing, which also comes in the form of the decorations and talismans, which for those who need it set, these are dedicated stat buffs that you can add on slots in your armor and weapons, as well as the talismans having their dedicated slots and stats. The decorations and the slots come into 3 levels, and you can craft them among in exchange for materials just like the armor pieces. But in tradition since World, now you get special stats through levels, meaning that only having one level of a certain stat will give you the benefits, at least in a percentage, which I think is a healthier balance for the game to make you feel a sense of progress, as well as making a huge sense of creativity with your armor sets, because the pieces also have stat bonuses in levels. I do wish you could upgrade low rank armor to high rank like previous games in order to keep some sense of relevancy and creativity, but this is still a good way to balance things out. Until we start talking about the talismans. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, both this game and World have done this worse than the classic formula if you ask me. And yes, before it gets mentioned, you can technically upgrade the low rank armor to be on a higher level that can come close to the ones in other ranks, but not only do they never catch up to higher ranks version of that in terms of defense points, the stats also, as far as I noticed, don't actually mix up, so you cannot have the same creativity between versions of the armor. You'd be simply getting weaker versions. And with how tedious does the task of grinding armor spheres get, you're pretty much achieving just as much than if you went out to forge the higher rank version of that armor to begin with. But if someone can correct me on this, please let me know, I'd be happy to be wrong. But yeah, talismans, right. Taking Try as reference, if you wanted a talisman, you will have to do missions and maybe even doing mining to get some form of ore, and sometimes it will give you special stones that when opening them at the end of the mission, you will get talismans or even weapons, with the talismans having randomized stats. This game and World use the melting pot, in which you give them materials for monsters, which by the way are only the ones at high rank and above, making the whole low rank work even more meaningless compared to earlier games, and it will be randomized as well. While I prefer this kind of gacha system over actual microtransactions, the idea of hunting down top monsters only to spend the materials on maybe getting the stuff that you want is a downgrade from the reward system in the original, simply because I didn't need to run out of materials that have other uses that I might need for armor and weapon crafting in earlier games. This wouldn't be a problem if I was allowed to use all kinds of materials in order to cover this, instead of only a select few of parts of each monster and having to spend dozens of them in order to get a good batch of medals and see what you can obtain. Luckily, the game has a way to work around this with friend vouchers, which you can obtain by playing online, and the defender tickets, which I'll talk about later, but yeah, you can technically work around it, just not that much. And also doesn't help that with the alleged table system of the talisman that basically make players get only certain kinds of talismans no matter how much they grind, this system could really get a better implementation on future games, or to be patched up since the randomized aspect of it falls really short. Given what it asks from the player, especially when, if you ask me, we had a much better system. The way both this game and World handle the talisman and the lack of low rank upgrades for armor are the two things I feel the classic games did overall better, but that might just be me. Now let's talk about the major gimmick of this game, the Rampage mode. It's a mixed bag, but it's not as new as we may say. A lot of Monster Hunter games have at least one form of being in a stage that requires you to protect a fortress from being destroyed. From Lao Shan Long and Freedom Unite, Shenmue and Try, and Sora Magdaros in World. This game turns that gimmick into a full dedicated kind of mission. During each mission, you get a set amount of weapons and soldiers at your disposal, which increase as you play through the mission, and repel waves of monsters, with one final monster to hunt down at the end. But that's all there's to it. Protect the fortress, but with a more dedicated twist than in previous games. Not that big of a deal, but also not something that big to love. Finishing this kind of mission gives you defender tickets of different levels. Depending on the level of difficulty the mission may have, the higher level of the tickets. And these tickets, as well as certain materials from the returning Apex Masters from 4 Ultimate, you can craft what I consider an amazing new idea this game brings, the Rampage weapons. These are variations of the Village Team weapons, although these ones have a special aspect of being customizable in terms of skills and stats, from giving them higher sharpness, elemental stats, buffs and debuffs for your attacks, higher attack, critical rate, the list can go on. This seriously kicks ass since it allows players to have their weapon. Problem is, it's not as open as it could be, since you can only customize so much given the limited slots and how each slot has a specific set of elements to customize. I hope this idea, as well as the Palamutes, become a staple in the series moving forward, since it will be great to focus on your dedicated weapon rather than having multiple weapons for different occasions. I'm at least glad I'm given a choice to do things the way I want with my weapon to be about, and what I can do to make my character unique to me, especially with the insane amount of cosmetic features. Now, World brought this in a fantastic way by giving us special armor that could be both equipment or just layer armor to look cool. But here, while there's still not that many special event armors, you have all of this game's armor sets to forge in order to customize your character's look. This is one of the most addicting things to do and adds a lot of replay value, since now you'll be focused on pretty much hunting for fashion and rocking some cool looks and maybe even cosplay your characters from other franchises. Now let's talk about the second half of the game's title, the monsters. Now I'm just gonna put this to move on quickly. A lot of monsters, at least from Vanilla World, were very samey in terms of the variety we will get. To this day, for example, I genuinely think that while it has some unique attributes, Anjanath is just a weaker pink version of the Deviljho. And while having appeal for certain monsters is a matter of personal choice, I think this game makes an effort on bringing more variety within the monster selection, from adding more Leviathans and insect types of monsters in comparison, as well as giving each one of them a bigger identity in order to stand out. And I know it seems like I'm hating a world, I know, and I'm sorry, but as I mentioned before, the only reason why I see this kind of differences is because I played and enjoyed my time with World all the way to the end. It's just that the things that Rise does in comparison, in terms of aesthetic, themes, and presentation, have a stronger sense of identity than World, and its versatility makes it easier for me to enjoy Rise over World. But I know very well that without World, Rise may have never existed. Rise simply hits all of my personal boxes to the point where I don't see that much of a reason to go back to World unless it's for the content that is exclusive to it. Hell, after 300 hours of gameplay, it was easy for me to revisit games like 4 and 3 Ultimate on the 3DS before jumping back into World. I still recommend people to play World, but I think I am fine with Rise when it comes to this phase in the Monster Hunter franchise. I know it's a complicated topic in the community, but that's generally how I feel. So let's just move on to the finale. As I mentioned before, there are two major Elder Dragons to take care of in the story, the Wind Serpent Ibushi and the Thunder Serpent Narwa, who are trying to reunite and will cause damage to the village in the process unless you stop them. Now, Ibushi gives you the advantage of being sent on a rampage mission, which gives you the Dragonators and assets outside of your fighting skills that make the fight a lot easier to take in. Narwa, on the other hand, it's all about your skills, not just as a hunter but also a platformer. Never in my life would I thought I would have to do plenty of platforming in a Monster Hunter game, since for the Narwa fight you get these platforms with different weapons that can help you deal a lot more damage, as well as a one-time use for the Giant Cannon and the Dragonators, so make those count. Unless you're an Instaglaive user who can just jump around by default and make the fight a bit of a joke. But both these fights manage to bring a sense of epicness in a game where every fight is supposed to be epic. Especially when you have other Elder Dragons to fight against on regular levels, Ibushi and Narwa manage to stand out, especially with their incredibly Japanese theme songs. Now, after the taken care of individually, it seems all efforts were meaningless since Narwa and Ibushi do manage to reunite and it's now up to you to fight them together. In the update version 3.0 of the game that came out 2 months after the release of the game. Now, I want to talk about this, and it's my continuation to the great topic section on game journalism. Another issue I think is still pretty much alive and enforced within gaming journalism and viewers is that reviews are starting to lose significance since the games you buy at launch don't always end up being the ones you will have after a few months. I know articles and videos need to be done at launch in order to bring or use the hype of a new game coming out for the sake of making your work get awareness. But given how updates and patches are becoming more frequent with each passing year, I think review updates should also start being normalized a bit more, especially if those updates in the game make your reviews feel outdated and pointless given how those changes may make your reviews have no sense of what's being said. I can think of a few examples, but let's keep it to this game. I remember seeing some reviews here and there that will point out the amount of monsters and the lack of an ending to the story, things that have changed since the release of the game, and makes those arguments lack sense since newcomers might listen to those reviews and say, "What are you talking about?" Since by that point, the game will be massively different. And I think it's important to normalize the idea of also updating reviews since again, there's always a chance that the update may make the game more or less appealing than it originally was. And this applies especially for those that write reviews in a way that tells viewers if they should pay attention to a game they might have interest in. I do need to give this its own dedicated section for a great topic. I know that very well. There is a lot to consider. But I do want to at least put on the table that it's been years since game development has changed from how it used to be, and if the changes are big enough to contradict the original work of journalism, it is important to spread the awareness, especially when you consider that some folks might only rely on you for that kind of information. There is a huge difference between I cannot recommend this game and I cannot recommend this game at this current state, because that also brings the aspect of enforcing the idea that developers should make an effort to improve on their games after they're being launched if there is something worth improving. In the case of Monster Hunter, I rather have these current methods of updates rather than buying the ultimate re-release of the game and having to do all the stuff from the vanilla version all over again. Now that is when I prefer having a chance to keep my progress and having the next stop in form of updates and DLC expansions like Iceborne. Majorly because I cannot imagine how overwhelming must have been for new players to jump into World when Iceborne came out, only to see all of the quests that tell you to be hunter rank about 100 or even 300. But that's enough of that topic, let me know your thoughts on that. I think the changes through the updates, like having the Apex Masters both on Rampage and regular missions, was a cool addition that keeps that freedom aspect of the game. And having Kushala Daora, Teostra, Chameleons, and a new version of boss tracks are great additions for the final missions of the main game and a showcase for things to come. But when it comes to the final fight against both Ibushi and Narwa combined, there was a lot of speculation on what the fight will be. Either a team battle, a fusion dance, or maybe even the birth of a new monster. And it's not perfect since I think they treat Ibushi like father, given how easy he is to kill, especially since we never get a chance to properly fight it. But at least I could have never expected to have this kind of fight. This fight has a lot of things to digest. Not only does it give you as many ways to defend yourself as possible, including a turtle that allows you to not die at least once per use, but it also puts every aspect of the game's mechanics to the test, from learning to read the All Mother's attacks and the environment, but also when to use the wirebook after an attack, since unlike all the other monsters, you might run the risk of getting damaged again if you just jump or counter the first hit. Something that from my experience, only this fight and boss tracks really use throughout their entire arsenal. But most importantly, the environment, setting and narrative with how they were showing us that this particular fight, is the final boss of the game, which is impressive in a game where technically speaking, you're always fighting final bosses. And that is one of Monster Hunter's consistent attributes, in which despite having a main line of epic monsters to fight, you will always have that final fight that manages to bring a closure to the entire adventure and have a climactic moment that reflects everything you went through. And this game is no exception. As I mentioned before, and saying that this will matter later, I've been a fan of the Monster Hunter series for over a decade with Tri on the Wii. I went back to previous games after that and kept doing my best to follow the series despite not having every game available. And one consistent bless but also curse within the series is the constant change. No matter how much you enjoy the formula of one game, the next game will have a different line of monsters, environments, mechanics, and overall things to do. And if those changes don't satisfy you, you might as well roll the dice and wait for the next installment to have something to satisfy you. For example, if you love the underwater themes and mechanics in Tri, then there hasn't been a game for you since then, given how future games simply remove that way of playing. And whether or not you love the improvement, that doesn't change the fact that there's always a chance that the experience you get with one game will not be the same with the next one. for better or worse, given the direction of said game. So it ultimately becomes into a matter of what you're looking for in this kind of games. Monster Hunter is not a perfect series, and it never tries to be. It tries to bring you unique experiences with each passing title. And to me, as well as maybe those who still keep other titles for whenever we feel nostalgic, we know we have a reason to go back. But given how Capcom shuts down online servers for the sake of supporting the current games, I also know the frustration of losing something no matter how much we hold on to the nostalgia, or just we generally think that this game should keep the support. I still wish we could go back to the city of Lock, since I think that was one of the best online servers in all Monster Hunter games, but in the end, I still have the way to fight Sirius and Lagarcrus at its best, Fatalis and its many variations. Hell, somebody recently made a mod to fight an almost completely new monster on the PC version of Monster Hunter World. So there are ways to still live those experiences. I guess the middle ground for this section is that every game will give you something that only that game can give you in comparison to the rest of the games in the franchise, both past and future. So in the end, I can recommend Monster Hunter Rise just as much as I can recommend you all the other games, since all of them, dated or not, will give you an epic adventure worth remembering.